Hello, everyone. This is Buck with Table Flippers Inc., and we're bringing you a Star Wars Unlimited Set 2 meta recap. We're going to go over all of the top decks from the Set 2 meta, give you our thoughts on if they're going to stick around for Set 3, and then open up some discussion for what's going to happen in Set 3. All right, so this first deck we're going to do, Sabine Green ECL. Everyone should be familiar with this deck. It's pretty budget, it's pretty good, and it's a very linear gameplay, so this is going to be very noob friendly. So first we've got Sabine, and we've got Energy Conversion Lab. We know Sabine is great because she flips on 4. She does 1 damage to each base on her leader side, and then her unit side, when it attacks, it does 1 damage to each enemy base. Really solid, really fast leader. Fantastic when you're trying to develop an early aggro. Now, Energy Conversion Lab has an epic action. Play a unit that costs 6 or less from your hand. Give it ambush for this phase. Pretty straightforward. I know at first when we were reading about this card before the game released, everyone thought this card was going to be super busted because they didn't understand. This doesn't mean you get to play the leader for free. You still have to pay the cost, which still makes it a fantastic base, but not nearly as broken as people thought it was. So, and that also is going to give us options for the 3 probably best colors for aggro in this game, which are red, green, and heroism. So first we're going to go over space units. We've got 3 copies of Green Squadron A-Wing, essentially a 3-2 for 2. You just can't beat that kind of value. We've got 3 copies of Wing Leader. You get to buff something that's already in play. It's a 2-1. It's going to die fairly early, but once you've used it to put those 2 experience tokens down, you don't really care what happens to it. 3 copies of Red 3 does a great job of buffing your heroism units. Not a fantastic space unit by itself, but it works well enough. You've got 2 copies of Bright Hope. Bright Hope is going to be great for your control matchups, specifically for Bosk, because it's going to allow you to bounce any ground units that they have put bounties on. Now, as a whole, the space package for this deck isn't great, so it's really good that you can move from one arena to the other based off of what your opponent's doing. So you have the option to dodge. Unfortunately, though, if you do run up against a space-heavy deck, your space package isn't going to fare very well. We've got 2 copies of R2-D2. This one has become really prevalent for the Set 2 meta because Boba Fett has become so rampant. You need to be able to dig for your Poe Damerons or your Darksabers as soon as you can. R2-D2 is just going to help kind of smooth that out and make sure that you get there. 2 copies of Rebel Pathfinder. It's a 2-3 for 2 with Saboteur, probably one of the weaker units in the deck, but it is going to help you for your matchups where you're running into Lieutenant Childson, or if you run up against an Emperor Palpatine deck with Emperor's Royal Guard, it's going to help you get by that. Most matchups, you're probably going to be sideboarding these out or turning it into a resource. 3 copies of Sabine Wren. A 2-3 for 2 is okay, but she does, do that 1 extra damage when she attacks to a base, and if you've got the 3 aspects, she can't be attacked. It's okay. I think she's probably going to find her way moving out of the deck. I could be wrong. She does get the buff from Darksaber, which can be nice, but I've often been a fan that if you require 2 cards to make a card good, it's not really that good. 3 copies of Battlefield Marine, a 3-3 for 2. Fantastic stat line. I believe this card will probably see play for the foreseeable future. I can't say for the life of the entire game, but it's going to be played for a very long time. 3 copies of Fleet Lieutenant. 3-3 for 3 is not the best stat lines in the world, but the ability to attack with a rebel unit and give it +2/+0 That's why you play this card. It could probably be a 1/1 for 3 and still be playable, but the 3/3 stat line does help it actually have some value after it's played. 3 copies of Cassian Andor. Cassian Andor is really good because he's a 3/5 for 3, which is kind of the new stat line you want to hit. You can smuggle them in, so it makes resourcing a lot easier if you're trying to build a faster start against your opponent. And the fact that he comes into play readied when you play him smuggled is really good. So it gives you a lot of options and the ability to hit your opponent for 3 extra to the base when he thought that you had nothing available. 2 copies of Fighters for Freedom. This card was a lot better in set 1. It's still really good in set 2, but we're playing a lot of green or just straight non-red cards in this deck now. So this card did get a little bit worse. This is one of the cards that you want to keep in mind when you're sideboarding out, because there's some matchups. This is really good in control matchups. Not super great in aggro matchups, but we'd have to look at doing a full sideboard tutorial on this one to really go into the depths of what you do with that one. 3 copies of K2SO. This card, I hate to say, this card actually got worse in set 2 simply because Poe Dameron and Wrecker are so good. This used to be the de facto ECL move on turn 3. It would have taken just about any unit off the board, done damage, made your opponent discard a card. Still a solid play. I think this is still going to be played in red aggro decks for the foreseeable future. But Poe Dameron and Wrecker, you kind of want to save your ECL triggers for that. So this card did get a little bit worse. Still a fantastic card, though. 3 copies of Poe Dameron. I was running 2 copies before, and I bumped it up to 3 simply because you have to see this card in the Boba Fett matchup. If your opponent flips Boba Fett on turn 5 and you don't have Poe ready to go, you're probably going to lose the game. Poe has the ability to, on attack, you can discard up to 3 cards from your hand. For each card discarded this way, choose a different option. Deal 2 damage to a unit or base, defeat an upgrade, or an opponent discards a card from their hand. This can have the opportunity to punish your Boba Fett player on the flip because you can discard a card to do 2 extra damage. You hit him for 8, taking his leader out before he gets a chance to do anything like put a Boba Fett's armor on him or drop an overwhelming barrage. But in case your opponent does have the opportunity to get a Boba Fett armor down before Poe Dameron can be played, you do have the option to destroy that. So really solid. Poe Dameron is almost your de facto ECL play. There are going to be situations where you'll want to use ECL for other things, but you almost always want to save it for Poe or Wrecker because everything else is just so much worse by comparison. Wrecker. 3 copies of Wrecker. I think this might be the best unit printed in set 2. It's kind of expensive at 6, but it's a 7/6 with Overwhelm, and when you play it, you can defeat a friendly resource if you do 5 damage to a ground unit. This has the opportunity to take out 2 fairly large units when it comes down. And as a cheap aggro deck that likes to go wide, being able to take out those large problematic units is going to be huge for you. So if you're not using your ECL for Poe, you're probably saving it for Wrecker. All right. So this is 3 copies of Metal Ceremony. I have never been a huge fan of this card. When it works really, really well. When you don't have the opportunity to use it, it's essentially a free resource card. Unfortunately, we have more units that aren't rebels in this deck with the set 2 build, so it loses a little bit of its potency, but I think it's still probably a 3 of for now, just to be on the safe side. 3 copies of Rebel Assault. This is just fantastic for squeezing out the close out of the game. doing that, 2 extra damage, compressing with 2 attacks. It's a solid play. All right. 3 copies for a cause I believe in. I think this is still a very good card to play, even though we're running more non-heroism cards, such as you have Darksaber and there was another one, but I'm drawing a blank. But essentially, your Darksaber is going to be. Actually, no. I think in this build, the Darksaber is the only non-heroism card you're running. So you just need to be mindful of that. There are going to be times where you're only going to end up doing 3 damage, but I think it is still a solid play because it does let you filter out. So I think it's still worth running a 3 of. 3 copies of Darksaber. Darksaber on a turn 4 Sabine flip is pretty much a game winner unless your opponent has an immediate answer for it. It does have the ability to buff up your Sabine Wren unit as well as your Sabine Wren leader, depending on how you play it. There's a lot of situations where you would actually want to throw your Darksaber down on, say, a Battlefield Marine or even an R2-D2 if you're running up against another aggro deck, because this is going to allow you to pump up your leader, Sabine Wren, instead. So a great card. I slept on it at first. I was only running a 1 of, and then once I did enough playtesting, I became a fan of running the full 3 of, even though you do take the hit from the 4 cause I believe in. Okay. Now let's look at the sideboard we're running. Heroic Sacrifice. I'm not huge on this card at the moment, but it is great for triggering your K2SO activations. So I think there are certain aggro matchups where this is going to be a good one. Confiscate with Bosk running around as much as it is, or the Sabine Mirror, or even certain Boba Fett matchups. It's great to be able to bring in a little bit of upgrade hate from the side. Timely Intervention, 2 of those from the sideboard. I was running this in the main deck, and I might actually go into future iterations of the deck where I'll be going back to running it main board. It is just such a good card against aggro matchups, but if you've got a lot of control in your local group, it might be great to leave those on the side. 2 copies of Sundari Peacekeepers. Almost instrumental in the Sabine Mirror match because it's going to help you take out some of your opponent's smaller units, and it's going to allow you to restore. So those are going to be really helpful. And then 2 copies of Adelphi Patrol Wing. I'm not sold on it. It'll probably end up being something else, but it's nice when you're running into those more mid-range matchups and you need a little more damage to close out. So this is the deck in whole. Most decks only vary a few cards. This deck has done fairly decent in the Set 2 Showdown season. It hasn't won nearly as many as Boba Fett has, but we all can agree that I don't necessarily think that Boba Fett leader himself is broken. He's just so good that anything else is going to pale in comparison. So that's probably the deck we're going to go over next. But thanks for tuning in. Don't forget to drop us a like and subscribe, and we'll bring you more Star Wars, One Piece, and Pokemon content in the near future. All right, thank you very much.